This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there, and welcome to the show. I am so happy to welcome my friend Eric Peters from Eric Peters Autos to the program as we do each Tuesday. Eric, I almost feel like this is a therapy session just because, we've got some heavy things to discuss, but I'm feeling very encouraged. Not in the sense like all of our problems are gone, but tell me what your thoughts are on the uncovering of some pretty official yet carefully hidden corruption that's been laying there for years.
Oh, you mean the DOGE thing and USAID?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that strikes me about it that's fascinating, you hear the term entitlements batted around a lot. And of course, that typically means things like Social Security and various welfare programs. But my God, I mean, look at the way the entitled bureaucrats have assembled in great high dudgeon to protest that we lowly taxpayers might object to the money that we're forced to hand over to the federal government being used to finance and fund our own ruin.
It's astonishing. And look, I'll admit, I have reached a point some time ago where I felt like, you know what, the federal government is so rotten and so thoroughly corrupted that really there's no hope. Let it burn to the ground. In fact, I think this is probably why a lot of us voted for Trump, not so much out of our love for the great orange man, but just because he's the one who has said, I'll burn it to the ground. And frankly, it looks like they're doing a very good job just based on the people who are protesting the loudest right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the great issues that we're facing is the opacity of the thing. It's Kafkaesque. It's Byzantine. It's this enormous, what would you even come up with? What would the term be for it? Meaning the federal government and the labyrinthine various departments and sub-departments and offices and agencies and NGOs, all of these things that we're forced to sluice our money into, and we have no idea even what we're being forced to finance. And now, looky here, we're beginning to get a little look at some of the things that we've been forced to finance, and it's absolutely outrageous.
I know I spent the better part of yesterday both researching and writing on the whole USAID issue. And I know it's easy. I'm going to just clarify because I had to learn this too. Aid. They're not talking about, this is a charity and it's blessing people's lives all around the globe. It's the Association for International Development or Agency for International Development.
Yep.
And when they say that, what that's concealing is this is a front for CIA coups and protests and dissent and regime change, all the stuff that makes the world less safe rather than more safe.
Yeah, we've gone so far down the river from the original intent of the Constitution, where the federal government was supposed to be this relatively small entity that concerned itself chiefly with maintaining national defense and a few other simple functions, to this entity that permeates everything and is so thoroughly corrupt, it would make Nixon blush. I mean, he seems like an upright and proprietary kind of a guy compared to what we're dealing with now.
It's revealing, and on the one hand, like you say, it can leave you a little nauseous when you realize, wow, they were taking advantage of everybody at every level, with taxpayer dollars, taken from us by threat of force, and yet I'm feeling very encouraged to see some of this come out, even though I'm seeing the opposition start to really solidify and the protests beginning, and I'm wondering what are they going to do to try to stop this? Didn't Trump didn't he just order a 90-day pause in USAID activities?
I think he did, and I think they're going to be out of luck as far as preventing this from proceeding, because what's abundantly clear is that we're talking about a really small minority, relatively speaking, of bureaucrats and apparatchiks that perhaps might number in the thousands versus however millions of Americans there are that are forced to finance all of this. It is absolutely not a populist thing. And that's what's fascinating to me about it. Trump rode back into the White House on a swell of populist outrage against precisely this kind of thing. And these people, they don't get it. They don't see how they're perceived by us, the deplorables, out here in the rest of the country.
Well, and there's an interesting success story here too, and this is along the lines of the great and mighty are sometimes confounded by the weak or the simple, and that is you look at the DOGE team of engineers, and I'm aware of about 6 of them who've been named by name by the people who are opposed to USAID, being looked at or investigated, and they've actually released these individuals' names, like with implied threats. Hey, these guys have addresses. and lives if we choose to let them keep them. It's like, how more blatant could you be?
Sure, it's going to get to that. It's probably going to get worse, but that's fine. Sometimes you got to roll over the rotting log to find the rattlesnake, right? And that's exactly what's happening right now.
I know you and I are both fans of Gato Malo, who blogs, on Substack. And I'm including in my show notes today a terrific post from Gato Malo about DOGE and the budget audit of doom. And there was a great line in here about, these engineers, 20-year-old autists, at least according to Wired, they've autistic young engineers going over code. They are just hyper-focused and able to find all the little details. And here's the line. Imagine being a 30-year veteran bureaucrat and then being fired by a 17-year-old autistic engineer with a laptop.
Yeah, isn't it great? Now, the macro take-home point here is that we're supposedly in a democracy. We hear that all the time from these people. Well, I think in a democracy, each year, whatever spending proposals there are should be put forward for a vote by the legislature. I mean, every single one of them. And it should be debated whether it's worth spending our hard-earned money, our tax dollars, on these things. Instead, what we've got is this machinery that once it's in place, it just keeps on rolling. An allotment is given to whatever it is, one of these NGOs for this year, and it's presumed that the following year it'll simply be not only reauthorized but increased. I say we should be debating these things every single year. I
agree. And I want to just walk through a couple of the different examples of places where again, we're not talking chump change. This is not, as I heard one news outlet say, well, this is less than 1% of the total federal budget. No, it's not. It's a huge amount of money. So this is a headline. No immigrant should be detained, says left-wing nonprofit with $769 million federal immigration contract.
Mm-hmm.
And
isn't that great?
And then we come to Ukraine, which it turns out USAID was very closely tied to everything that's been going on in Ukraine, not just recently, but going back to that Orange Revolution in 2014.
Yep. And didn't they, I caught another little interesting snippet about some enormous tranche of condoms that were being financed for Gaza somehow, or
$50 million.
Yeah. And, think about that. And no wonder people are angry. Imagine it. We get up and we slog to work every day. We bust our butts to earn money. We're trying to pay the rent. We're trying to pay the mortgage. We're trying to keep our families fed. But the federal government thinks it's fine to take our money to pay for something like that. It's beyond smearing poo in our faces at this point.
Yeah. Well, it's, the DC, the swamp recognizes that daylight is being shined in its direction, and the things that we're seeing are very, very clear. I'm just in awe. I think it was Ron Paul in an article published on Lou Rockwell earlier this morning talked about how there was a huge outcry about Ukraine saying, hey, well, how can these Ukrainian news outlets even function if there's not money flowing to them? And it's like, wait a minute. Why would the U.S. be funding news outlets in Ukraine in the first place?
Correctamundo. Right. The whole system, I think, is teetering on the verge of collapse. And I say bully. And it's teetering on the verge of collapse, not so much because of insolvency, which is a huge factor, but simply because it has lost legitimacy. There are still, I think, a cadre of people who want this to continue. But by and large, the majority of the population, the people that elected Trump, are done with it. They're tired of it. They no longer respect it. And without respect, ultimately, the government can only rule by force, and all that does is to further erode whatever lingering legitimacy it may have.
Well, and there was one other aspect, and I'm just touching on this because this is something you and I have talked about a few times before. USAID apparently is tied to the gain-of-function research that was taking place on coronaviruses in Wuhan, which explains why Fauci's pardon goes all the way back to 2014. Amazing.
Yeah, who'd have thunk it? Who'd have thunk it, right? And again, that's another thing. Granted, legally he immunized, so to speak, from prosecution, but it's now absolutely evident to any thinking, fair-minded person that he's a criminal. Else, why would he have to be pardoned by another criminal?
Exactly. So that's, to me, it's a very positive direction that things are going, and that's not to suggest all of our problems are solved, but I'm happy to see the light of day being shined in a place that's causing screams of consternation and outrage from the people who've been engaged in all this trickery and deception.
Oh, me too. There comes a time when you have to strike while the hammer is hot, and now is that time to not let up. I myself have thought about making some Trump 2028 signs just to further enrage the enemy. It's funny, but it's true. We can't let up. And Trump, I'm very happy about this, has not done what he did the first time around, and attempt to be reasonable with these people, attempt to find consensus, because it's suicidal. These people cannot be reasoned with. They cannot be brokered with. They cannot be compromised with. You give them an inch, as the saying goes, and they will take 10 miles every single time. They are the enemy, and it's important to understand that and act accordingly. So
I want to kind of zoom out and get a little bit more of the broader view, too, of what Trump has been up to here for the last couple of weeks, because he has not broken stride. As far as I can tell, it has just been go from the very beginning. As soon as he took office, he has had his nose to the grindstone, so to speak. And talk to me about your take on when we hear about, for instance, top FBI officials resigning or being asked to resign, or pronouns being removed from federal emails and so forth. I know that, of course, the left and the legacy media is outraged about it, but are you seeing some encouragement in terms of rolling back this woke, politicized Leviathan? Does it look like they're making progress?
Absolutely. I think it's done. I think people have had it with the insanity. The masks have literally come off. I think one of the great benefits of the awful thing that we experienced for almost 4 years under Biden, and particularly with regard to the masks, was this imposed insanity. Masks were a symbol of that. And what came after that? Well, all of a sudden it became normal, in air fingers quotes, to look at a man in a dress with an Adam's apple and say, yeah, that's a woman. Yeah, sure. Right? And people have had it with that because it's insane. It's crazy. And you get to a point where, the usual, I don't want to offend their feelings. I'm just going to just keep my mouth shut. No, it's enough. Parents have had to deal with their girls in school having to worry about whether a boy is going to come into the bathroom because he claims he's a girl. Right. And their daughters in college have had to try to literally compete against 6'2" or 3 guys, and lose the competition and be humiliated and degraded in that manner. And the righteous anger that's percolated up about that, I think, has become absolutely unstoppable. I think the woke overstepped their bounds, and they're going to be put back in their place.
I don't want to be pessimistic. I'm feeling very encouraged right now, but I'm also wary. And this is probably from the years of being abused financially and psychologically by my own government. Mm-hmm. But I'm waiting for another shoe to drop. And I don't think it's going to be the Trump administration or the people trying to roll this back. I'm wondering what trickery is waiting around the corner from those who feel it's in their interest to preserve this system.
Well, sure. A treed bear is most dangerous when it's treed. And that's what we're kind of dealing with right now, only it's even worse because these people are malicious. The bear is just trying to save its own skin. These people are malicious and horrible people. And I, too, would not be surprised if they attempt to pull something out of their hat. But I'm less worried about it now because I do think Trump seems to be on his game. And he seems to have people around him who are very bright, very focused, very articulate, and probably have gamed all of this stuff out and are ready for it. At least that's my hope.
Talk to me about, I know last week we got to see, some of the worst of the Democrats in terms of their opposition to 3 of Trump's cabinet appointees, Tulsi Gabbard, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and Kash Patel.
Kash Patel, yeah.
What are your thoughts as far as those choices and in terms of what we're seeing from the opposition, and the lengths they're willing to go to try to stop those appointees?
Well, the thing that's most fascinating to me with regard to Kennedy and Gabbard in particular is that these are people who just as recently as 4 years ago, before Biden, were darlings of the very people who now excoriate them. They were considered people who were rising stars within the Democrat Party. Now, all of a sudden, they are anathema. They are excommunicate. And that's because they've deviated from this insane orthodoxy that has come to embody the modern Democrat Party. And that's a fascinating thing in that it tells us just how out of touch and how out of mind the mainstream Democrats are. I think it's very likely Patel, who seems quite competent, and he seems to be a serious guy. I think he's going to be confirmed. And I think that probably it's going to wind up being the case that the other two get confirmed too, even though there is some opposition, particularly from the Dirty Turtle, with regard to that. And, again, the Dirty Turtle and these rhinos that are still lingering in the House and the Senate, they too have lost all legitimacy. Everybody has nothing but seething contempt for these people.
Agreed. And I hope that contempt continues to grow until they all have to find honest jobs, preferably as farmhands somewhere.
Yeah, the Dirty Turtle, they can barely prop him up anymore. He's another one of these ossified old cretins. And normally you want to be sympathetic toward the elderly because they're old, right? But these people have nothing left at the end of their lives but the politics and the celebrity that they crave and the power that they wield, to the extent that even if they literally have to be wheeled in or brought in on a stretcher so that they can raise their bony hand and say, "I," in favor of some new law, they're not willing to get it up until literally they're dead. And that says something about them.
That is a great point. Now, lest we stay too focused on just what's happening, at the federal level, I was intrigued by your article on February 1st about the neighbor lady getting hutted. Kind of illustrates we need to keep an eye on what's happening locally as well.
Well, sure. We've talked before about how, in my view, policing has gotten out of control. It's gotten disproportionate. Things that used to be handled in a different way. Here's an example. And you and I, when we were teenagers, let's say we were out too late in our car and we got pulled over by a cop. He might say, "Look, I'm going to follow you home, and I might have some words with your dad," something like that.
Right.
It wouldn't turn out to be the SWAT team gets sent to your parents' house over something like that, because there was a thing called judgment and proportionality. Well, I have a neighbor lady who's almost 80, and she happened to be at a shopping mall, and as she was backing up her car, she door dented another car, and she didn't stop to leave a note, which she should have. Granted, she should have done that. Anyway, she went home, and later that evening at 9:00 at night, three cop cars descended on her house, lights flashing, and practically kicked down her door. You probably would have if she hadn't answered it over this whole ordeal. Instead of just calling her or having one guy show up and say, "Hey, look, we got a report you did this. You need to call your insurance company. You need to pay for the damages." End of story. They turned it into this hut routine, which is what they all do now. You get pulled over for something, and it's no longer, "Hey, let's talk about it. Get out of the car." If you get out of the car, they'll start pointing guns at you and screaming at you to get on the ground now. And it's really sad, and it's really sick in that, as a rule now, cops have been trained to regard us, their fellow citizens, as some kind of Osama bin Laden resurrected thing that's a threat to their safety. And it's crazy. They're paranoid and we're terrified, and it's not good for either of us.
No, and I've seen this even in the rural area where I live, where, officers doing they were following up on what was believed to possibly be some stolen property. And there's the more cops show up, if there's more than one officer who shows up, it's a guarantee you're going to have somebody walking around there with a patrol carbine slung around his neck, like he's, pulling watch in case, the terrorist comes sneaking in.
Sure. In the case of my neighbor lady, they knew who she was. So obviously they looked her up, and she has no criminal record. She's an old widow. So obviously not any kind of a reasonable threat to anybody. They could have handled this very differently. I myself felt the same kind of a thing happened last summer when they changed the laws in my state about the farm use tags. I hadn't gotten the latest new ones. So I'm driving home, and I'm only about 3 miles from my house, and I pass two cops sitting by the side of the road, and they literally rooster tail after me, and they pull me over about a half a mile down the road. And they come out like they're dressed for Fallujah with their body armor on, and their mags, and multiple mags, and all of this stuff, because I had the wrong farm use tags on my truck.
Wow. You never know, man. Might have had to get it on, if you were making a move or something. I don't know. I shouldn't be that way, but you make a good point. The adversarial distance between the police and the public has grown to the point that it's a very dangerous thing for everybody involved.
Yeah. This is a poisonous legacy of 9/11 and the war on terror. I've lived in this rural county in Southwest Virginia for 20 years, and it literally used to be like Mayberry, and the cops used to be dressed like cops used to dress, meaning they had a shirt and a tie on, and that was it. And they drove around in old Crown Vics, and they were calm and reasonable because there was no reason not to be. There's almost no crime in my small rural county. Now these guys are all dressed up in their BDUs. Literally, they've got mags. They've got the wire web gear stuff. They've got multiple high capacity pistols on them. Hut, hut, hut. And it's because after 9/11, the federal government started dispensing all of these dollars to these local places, like where I live, so that they could buy all this gear and act as if we were living in some kind of a Palestinian war type situation.
Well, you can't say you live in civilization, even small town America, unless your police department has a huge armored vehicle, to participate in parades. Yep. And I know in southern Utah, I thought this was the most Orwellian thing ever. They got one of those great big Bearcats, which this is a war vehicle. Yep. And to help soften the blow, the appearance, it was stenciled on the side, civilian rescue vehicle.
Yeah.
Really?
Right. Right. There's some psychology at work here. If you dress up like you're going to war, you're going to act like you're going to war.
True.
You dress like a civilian cop, like we used to have in this country, and it's understood that you're a civilian cop and you're dealing with your fellow Americans. And, unless there's a good reason to act like you think you're about to get into some kind of an automatic weapons firefight, chill out. Just be normal.
Yep. When I saw those words, civilian rescue vehicle, my first thought was, well, I guess that's not pee on my back. It's just warm rain. Wow.
Right, exactly.
I was wrong.
Or they paint them like a bright colored, maybe put a teddy bear on the muzzle of the 50 cal, something like that.
Yeah, well, it just goes to show you got to stay vigilant and take the wins where you can get them. I think right now we're experiencing a fair amount of winning, at least at the highest levels, but let's stay vigilant at the lowest levels too.
Yep. I'd like to see some mockery come into play. You remember the great movie, The Blues Brothers?
Yes. Yep.
There was a great scene in that. That's where I get the hut, hut, hut thing from, because Jake and Elwood are getting in a little bit of trouble over something. And you see these guys pouring out of their SWAT vehicles, hut, 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 hut. And it ends up with, like 100 of them, like all pointing automatic weapons at Jake and Elwood. And it was funny, and it's serious, because it makes a good point that this stuff ought not to happen, not in America, not in a free country.
Based on that, I think I'm going to have to go rewatch The Blues Brothers just to kind of help keep my sanity.
Yeah, it's so worth it. It's one of the best movies ever made, in my opinion.
Eric, great to catch up with you as always. Looking forward to what we get to talk about next week.
Sounds good.
All right, again, Eric Peters from ericpetersautos.com. I've got a link in my show notes that will take you directly to his site where you can spend many happy hours learning and attaining knowledge.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.